I want to get this Nikki Haley stuff because it is really fascinating. I think that she's a figure that people should be checking out. You wrote a piece on Nikki Haley's, dull war on socialism, and her what is this, second chapter, third chapter of her political career right now. Could you sort of tell people what Nikki Haley has been doing after she left the high offices of the United Nations?
Yeah, it's been a source of fascination for me. As you said, I guess this is like her third sort of round trying to build a public career. But yeah, I mean, she started out, working for her parents' company. She grew up in Bamberg, which is very rural, became a state lawmaker, and then very quickly rose to become governor and beat a really competitive primary field, including current Governor Henry McMaster, and became the first. I mean, the headlines she made nationally were that she was the first woman and the first non-white governor in state history. And so, yeah, she sort of instantly got a national profile, served as governor, did about as much damage as any other Republican would in that office, in terms of defunding of public infrastructure and schools. In terms of union busting, I mean, she explicitly fought unions and recorded radio ads discouraging people from joining unions at Boeing when they came here. Was rewarded with a seat at the United Nations by Donald Trump. So was our UN ambassador for a few years there. I think that was, I want to say 2017 to 19. I'll be getting the years wrong, but stepped down as the Trump years wound down, and then sort of went quiet. And she's always been very ambitious. I mean, every 4 years, someone brings her up as either a presidential candidate or running mate. And she's never really made any serious moves toward that. So there's speculation as soon as she left the UN, like, oh, what's she going to do? Is she going to run for president? Is she going to move back to South Carolina? She actually bought a mansion in South Carolina on, I want to say it's Seabrook Island, one of the sea islands that has become just sort of a private island for millionaires. And so everybody was like, well, what's she going to run for? And so far, nothing. She has a super PAC that has a ton of money, but hasn't announced for any particular office. And instead, she has started this thing, it's a 501c4 organization called Stand for America. And I don't know how social media ads target geographically, if y'all ever see them, but I saw a lot for Stand for America shortly after she left the UN. Fascinating. Didn't really make much of it. The thing that really brought it onto my radar was my parents ended up on some mailing list or another, and they got physical mail from Nikki Haley earlier this year.
What an honor! The governor sending your parents mail.
Yeah, and
a letter from the king.
Right, yeah, and they were kind of baffled by it, and I mean knew that I would get a kick out of it, and they brought over this envelope because it had a letter from Nikki Haley. It was stamped with "Stand for America," and it had a banknote from Venezuela. It was a what's the currency?
The Bolivar.
A Bolivar, yeah. It was like 100 Bolivars, and there's like this long, sort of like John Birch style letter with it about the evils of socialism and how like people have to spend a wheelbarrow full of paper money to buy a loaf of bread there, and like it's only because of socialism. That's what it is. And it was odd, and it was like, Nikki, like, is this really what you're doing with all this political capital? You're just hitting up people's parents for money, like. And I did some research. I got some IRS docs, and I still don't completely get it. Like, I don't know why it exists. It's like, it's redundant. I mean, it's a political apparatus that says the same things as the Heritage Foundation or kind of like the neocon think tank world. I mean, it's like, it's like PragerU, but boring. Like, I don't know what it does exactly, but it's got a bunch of money. It spends like, so far they've spent $1.5 million on Facebook ads.
That's
to what end? I still don't know. Yeah.
No, I mean,
so that's what she's up to now.
Well, we have this clip here I'm going to play in 1 second, because it is actually interesting to see where she's positioning herself. But before we get to it, I mean, I don't know either, right? And you would know more than me. I mean, there's a part of me when it comes to Nikki Haley, having seen her, my first election was the first time I voted was against Nikki Haley. So,
yeah,
I've been following her for a while.
For Vince Shaheen.
Yeah, I voted for Vince Shaheen, who's like the most milquetoast Democrat ever. But it was my first time voting. I was very excited. Actually, the funniest thing is I had a bumper sticker on my car, and I remember like my wheel popping or something like that later, and the mechanic like giving me a really hard time like 6 months after the election about it. But anyways, I mean, Nikki Haley is fascinating because I'm going to be honest, I actually think that when it comes to having a kind of general political skill, I actually do think that she has an ability she can speak, she's clever, she's she's horrendous, don't get me wrong, but we're just judging talent. Like the Republicans could do a lot worse than Nikki Haley, right? I don't know how well she's polling, but like they put up Jeb Bush, right?
Right? She's not visibly a mutant like Mitch McConnell or all these other people.
She does do these two things. Like, I guess what I'm saying is with Nikki Haley is I've never been able to understand is if she's a true believer or if she's just completely cynical, right? And throughout her life and throughout her political career, I've leaned either way. So I am just going to say judgment is out, because there's a part of me that thinks like this is a great gig for her to just sort of like do politics without ever having to do politics again. Right? She just gets to send people like freak out mailers about socialism and live on a nice mansion.
That's what Jim DeMint did. That was
which is
he left Congress and worked for Heritage. Yeah, like early retirement. Yeah,
but anyways, but when she does speak, when she does make her interventions, I mean, she does play a role within that party, or at least for a very specific kind of economic conservative, right? Like very free market, pro-capitalist. We were talking earlier about how she was a union buster. I mean, when people talk about conservatives in the sense of like, what is the GOP, like from a Marxist perspective, drop the cultural stuff. What does the GOP really do? It's like the hammer to break labor's power, particularly in the South. And Nikki Haley plays that role well. We have this clip of her, I think it might be speaking at the Heritage Foundation, but I could be incorrect about that. But it's just very interesting because a lot of people, especially in our world, are getting very alarmed about like the Josh Hawleys, or maybe less so in possibilities of him winning, but what he represents, like the J.D. Vances, right? This kind of new, what they're calling, like the populists, like Republican.
Right populists.
Right populists. Thank you, Matt. And this talk from her is very much hitting at that. And I think it's interesting to see, if she does have a political role, this is what she's sort of representing.
It pains me to see some of our friends turning their backs on our principles. They're similar to the frightened Tories Margaret Thatcher faced in 1980. You know what I'm talking about. The conservatives who claim capitalism no longer works. They conclude that economic freedom fails families and hurts workers. So they're trying to create a hybrid capitalism, a hyphenated capitalism. It's all a sham. Tear off the window dressing, and they're calling for more mandates, more rules, and more government control of the economy and our daily life. They want to create more welfare programs and accelerate government spending. It's unthinkable, but they're fine with less personal freedom and more government power. That's not capitalism. It's socialism light. There was a time when conservatives understood that. In fact, there used to be a name for it. The quote, dime store New Deal. It's nothing more than bigger government, just not as big as the socialists want. Well, good luck with that. Conservatives will never outbid the left when it comes to growing government.
I just Googled the Fighting Tories and nothing comes up. I have no idea. Like, you know what we're talking about. Like, no. The only thing that comes
the Fighting Tories that we all know and love.
Yeah, like, what comes up is when like she was forced out of office like by the Tories. Like it wasn't her standing up. I don't know what the hell she's talking about. And then we all know dime store, New Deal. Nikki Haley, how old are you?
You're baiting yourself, and she's not that old.
Exactly,
right?
like a dime
Strom
store.
Thurmond said something like that. It's like, oh yeah, you were around for that. Nikki Haley's not that old.
It's like my dad would sometimes call a movie theater a show hall, and it's like, what the fuck? Okay, sure.
Right.
I mean, but it is really interesting to see her because she was sort of supposed to be the young face of the American conservative movement for a while, really hitting hard at like what seems to be the new genre of it.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she's supposed to be the young face, but yeah, it makes these oddly dated references to the Thatcher era or like sort of like deep cuts from the Reagan era. She'll name drop in speeches now, and it's like, it's a different brand than the Hawley conservatism. It's not, and it's not the libertarian sort of like her predecessor in office, Mark Sanford, would be the exemplar of the conservative wing. She is like, I guess a neocon. If you had to like put her in a camp, she's.
I mean, people should know, for example. No, I keep going. I just want to say for people who are familiar, like she took down the Confederate flag after the murders in Charleston, which was way too late.
Claimed credit for taking it down.
Yeah, claimed credit. So I don't mean to give her, but I'm just saying like people need to understand like where she sort of fits into, especially the Southern conservative movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. God, she still milks that to this day, and it's like,
I'm sure she does.
It was the barest concession to decency. And right up until the massacre at a church, she was defending the Confederate flag.
Mm-hmm.
The NAACP challenged her on it over and over again, and she gave a speech once where she said, "Well, I haven't heard any complaints about the Confederate flag from business leaders, so we're going to leave it up."
Certainly not from Maurice's barbecue.
The Bessinger clan. But yeah, she's like, she throws in some oddly dated references, and I don't know what to make of it other than like maybe she just has old dudes as speechwriters. But I mean, one that was really interesting, this was last year at the RNC, she gave a speech where the big applause line was "America is not a racist country."
Mm-hmm.
Which I have a Google alert for that exact phrase and get new results every day. She was one of, if not the first person to like recite that line verbatim. And it's still like just a constant drumbeat, but she mentioned Jeane Kirkpatrick in that speech, who was like an advisor to Reagan. She wrote, I had to Google this. I didn't know this history. She wrote the Kirkpatrick Doctrine, which was a specific sort of, I guess, extension of like, the Monroe Doctrine, the Roosevelt Corollary, saying that the United States can and should be the police of Latin America. And Kirkpatrick authorized the training of death squads in Central America. So, yeah, Haley.
That's who she's speaking to, right? Like that's who she's talking to, like old Bush guys and those sorts of and she's speaking against like this new Teal backed like Blake Masters and JD Vance, but also like Teal's just trying to do what the Koch brothers basically did, I think, like to create their own sort of like new satellite of candidates. And I think like Haley's like, well, no one's going back to the guys who actually won stuff like 30-40 years ago. I'm going to be their horse, basically.
Right. Yeah, that does seem to be her brand in all this. Yeah, it's I mean, she's a debt hawk, but also a war hawk. I mean, if you look at the messaging she pushes out again through this Stand for America thing, a lot of it is saber rattling about China and Iran, and the people who want war again are focused on those countries and looking for an excuse. So yeah, it is this sort of like Cold War era throwback that she's selling right now. So I don't know where that's headed, but it's not good.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like, yeah, we'll have to see if she's just a divining board for the donors or is representing some new movements. I'd love to get you back on sometime soon to talk mini golf. But in the last couple of minutes, I know we took you on a little bit later, but in the last couple of minutes, I think it's always helpful to end these interviews. And these are tough times, so we don't have to have anything too big here, but what are some things in South Carolina that are sort of giving you hope, some openings that you're seeing, community organizing, et cetera, that maybe because I know we do have listeners, particularly in Columbia and Charleston, but anywhere across the state. I mean, what are your feelings right now as someone living in South Carolina, where you're seeing these kind of openings and and hope and a kind of leftist struggle for a better future?
Yeah, I think first of all, for me, as a parent of kids in public school here, and as someone who was the education reporter at the paper in Charleston for a few years, the one of the greatest moments of hope I saw, while not necessarily explicitly left, was teacher labor. Teachers got fed up around the same time here that they did in a lot of other states. A year or two after the walkouts popped off in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, there were smaller but significant movements in North and South Carolina. They had a series of protests on May 1st, 2 years in a row. One in which it was the largest protest event on the State House grounds in recorded history. 10,000 people marched on the State House, led by teachers. So many walked out that they shut down school districts. Wow. Only for one day. It didn't have sort of the infrastructure or the the focus to maintain that walkout beyond one day. But it was the only thing I've seen in my adult life that put Republicans on their heels here. They had to listen. So yeah, first and foremost, teacher labor. I mean, teachers are tired, so tired right now. But I think if workers are going to assert their value here, I think teachers can and should lead the way. Yeah. SC for Ed is kind of the most active group. It's more recently formed. It's not officially affiliated, but sometimes works in coalition with the SCEA affiliate here in the state. But they're the ones who get things done, and they're teacher led. SC for Ed continues to give me hope. I think other than that, there are occasional, small pockets of labor organizing. We've had two newspapers unionize in the last couple of years, both owned by McClatchy, actually. The one down in Beaufort was the first tiny newsroom covering Beaufort and Hilton Head, followed by The State, which is a big newspaper in the state capital, Columbia. The News Guild is organizing here, as they've had a lot of success all over the country, but. And then the one other thing I would say that's been interesting is organizing for housing justice. Rent is out of control here as everywhere, especially in places like Charleston. It's through the roof. I mean, people can't afford to live in the same city where they work, especially if you work for the tourism industry or hospitality. I mean, people have to drive in or take our decrepit bus system in from the next county, and so there are a few sort of rays of light, I would say. One is there's a South Carolina Housing Justice Network that I've gotten to do a little bit of work with. Full disclosure, I've helped them out a little bit. There's a tenant-led group called Charles House, led by my friend Miracle Mazzi here in Charleston, who's a tenant in the Charleston Housing Authority, public housing, and got so fed up that she invited a news crew to film the abysmal living conditions of her home. Wow! And she took that step, and it inspired a lot of other tenants to come to her and say, yeah, I have the same problems, but I was afraid I didn't have the guts to do that, And so it's it's still in the early days, but like it is, tenants organizing to protect each other and protect themselves and their families. So yeah, Charles House, and I gotta shout out DSA. I am again, in full disclosure, I'm the recently elected comms secretary for Charleston DSA. So we're one of the two fully, I guess, official chapters in the state, Charleston and Columbia, and so we've got pretty exciting work going on in the areas of housing justice, labor, getting a start and a foothold in electoral politics. We're over 200 strong as a chapter, and it's something that gives me hope. There's a lot to despair about, but like, it's given me like meaningful work to do. So support DSA in places where you wouldn't expect to find it.
I mean, I love that. I mean, I'll just say as a top note, I think that there is a lot of opportunity in tenant organizing across the country, because it's something that affects so many people. And I think a lot of people can understand why you need to organize to fight back. Yeah. And also, I'll just say, as somebody, I haven't been back to South Carolina. I really need to, but I mean, it's not really by choice as much, but like, I haven't been back to South Carolina since I left over a decade ago. But what I always remind folks is like, when I left, I had no, and I was like a little socialist leaving out. No way would I have imagined 10 years later that there'd be, a growing socialist organization in Charleston. And I think it's really important for people to take stock in that and realize that, like, look, the things are bad right now, but they'd be a lot worse if people weren't doing anything about them. Right. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying let's sit on our butts and all like pat each other on the back, but like, people are doing things, and that's really, really exciting. And that should give us all a lot of hope. Paul, I really liked having you on. I'd love to have you on sometime in the future. People should definitely check out Brutal South Substack. Is there anything else we should point them to?
That's the main thing. Yeah, it's a newsletter. You can also look me up on wherever you get podcasts. It's the same name. It's called Brutal South.
It's a really phenomenal. The Substack, the writing is great, and the podcast is really interesting as well. People definitely should check it out. And we'll put ways for people to follow your work in the show notes, etc. Thanks again, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Paul.
Take care.